All of a sudden I heard this growling. Never heard anything like it before or since. It deep, guttural growling. I'm Mark Gilmer. I got started in all of this. I had actually had experiences before I got started in this, and I didn't really get me. I guess I don't know how to put it.
Maybe just tell me what your first experience was.
My first experience was actually bear hunting with a friend of mine in Minnesota. I imagine it was around 1993, 92, 93. And neither of us had been bear hunting before. And we had a bait out, which is legal in Minnesota. It's actually about the only way you're going to get a bear in Minnesota. And the bait had been hit, and he was sitting over it. And I was out there also, I suppose I was a few hundred yards away from him in thick woods. And I had set up a tree stand with a different form of bait, and I wasn't very far off the ground. I was probably only 12 feet or something. And all of a sudden I heard this growling, and it was this coming from the brush, and I'd never heard anything like it before or since. It deep, guttural growling. It wasn't very far away. And my 22-year-old mind thought bear coming into the bait. You gotta be prepared with a bear, especially the way I was hunting. So I clicked safety off on my rifle, and I was staring at where this growling was coming from, and this tree behind it, about, I'm gonna say, it's probably only 30 yards away from me at the most, and it started shaking. And I was watching this tree. It was a tree, had to be probably a good 10-inch popple tree or bigger. And this thing was just shaking back and forth like I said, nothing I'd ever seen before. But I had attributed that to a bear because I didn't know any better. Didn't know that bears didn't shake big trees. Never went and looked for tracks. I had never even heard of tree shaking being a thing with Sasquatch until I went to the Sasquatch Summit in 2014 or 2015, and someone had mentioned it. I never put the two together because I'd never seen a bear. I know when I walked out at dusk, I was pretty nervous because I didn't see anything. I just knew there was something growling at me in the brush. But I didn't think there would be a Sasquatch in Minnesota at that time. I'd seen Patterson Gimlin film on In Search of, like pretty much everybody else from that time. And I thought it was a Pacific Northwest thing, nowhere else. Well, quite a few years later, I suppose it was about 2004 or 2005, I was living in a town called Hinckley, Minnesota. And I was talking on the phone to a friend of mine about something or another, probably something with vehicles. That's what we did. And it was dark, and I looked out. I lived in a duplex, I guess it was a duplex, but it was split entry. That's the word. I looked out, had big picture windows in the front. I looked out the window, and there was this massive thing walking away from me in my yard. I had two yard lights, It wasn't directly under them, but I could clearly see it walking away on two legs. And it was a Sasquatch, but it was huge. It was ground was frozen. It was in about this time of the year, mid-November. And I went out the next day, looked for tracks, didn't see, I couldn't find anything, couldn't even find an impression on the frozen ground. No snow yet. But it was an old dairy farm. And it walked by the the the, the and it was green and white, so it was very contrasting on this building, and the eave was white also. And it was probably, I'm going to say, 8 feet or so, maybe 10 feet away from that eave when it walked by it, and its head was above it by a couple few inches. And it walked down, and I had another building off that went away from that, and it just walked up by that building. It took a 90-degree turn and walked off into the dark. And I was, like I said, I was on the phone with somebody, and he asked me, he noticed that, I was very quiet. What's going on? And it's something big just walked through my yard. And he says, neighbor's horse got out. And I said, well, my neighbor's horse is walking on two legs. And I didn't say another word about it. And I never even talked about it in Minnesota when I was there. You don't want to be ridiculed. Don't know what you've seen. At that time, I guess mysterious encounters were out. So I started watching that and found out that, well, they are in Minnesota, and started doing some internet research, but I didn't really get into it still. I thought, well, just a fluke, even though there's a lot of going north from there. There is a lot of area that's nothing but woods at that time, anyhow. I haven't been back there in a long time. Where they could live easily. I lived in Texas for a while, never gave a thought about them being, and I was in North Texas. I wasn't even that far from Hobnubby. Actually, I'd been there. Never heard of the siege while I was there. Then we moved to Washington.
So did you then see something when you moved to Washington?
I have not seen anything since I moved from Washington. That one time I thought I seen something walk across the highway in front of me, quite a long ways in front of me on Sherman Pass. But I was thinking about Bigfoot at that time, so I discount it myself. But what really got me into this subject, I deliver heavy equipment for a living, and I had to pick up a motor grader in the middle of the Colville National Forest. And there was no pin drops at that time yet. It was, if you got one, like I had a flip phone, so it wouldn't do me any good anyhow at that time. And we were just told, drive 16 miles down this road, and you're going out in the middle of nowhere. And I met a friend of mine coming. He went in for a dozer. I'd met him as he was coming out. I was going in. So we stopped. He says, "Oh, you'll see where I turned around. You'll see my tracks." He says, "It's a long way in there." Well, I went in, and this road was small. I had my low boy. It was not a great time going in. And I get to this clearing where there was a corral, and I could see where somebody had turned something around, backed a trailer in with duals at this corral. And I thought, well, I wonder if this isn't where Al turned around. Well, that blade's got to be here somewhere. It's got to be close by. So I just parked that old beer belt off to the side, and I knew I could turn around there, so I wasn't going to go any further. I'm going to walk down this road a little bit. It's got to be here. I started walking, and I went around a little bend, and I noticed I couldn't hear that truck running. Boy, that's odd. I turned around, I walked back, and I could hear this truck running. That's really weird how, there's a little rock face there, how that just, there's no sound beyond this. Oh, whatever. Started walking down the road some more. Then I could hear this talking. And there was two people, I'm going to say, talking. And I couldn't understand a bit of it. I hadn't heard anything even close to it ever in my life. And I listened for a few seconds, and it sounded like they were right there. I mean, I was right on top of them, and there was a little rise, from where they cut the road in. So I climbed up that rise, and huckleberries were ripe at this time of the year. And I walked up there, and I know I should be looking at whatever's making these noises, and there's nothing there. It bothers me still. There was nothing there. And it was like they noticed me. And when they noticed me, they stopped talking. And then I could feel people staring at me, or something staring at me. And I was already uncomfortable, honestly. And I sat there I doubt it was even much more than a couple seconds. And I heard what sounded like a wolf whining. And close by. And that was enough. And I noped it right on out of there. I walked right back to that truck, and I didn't stop for anything. And as I was walking back, I thought, oh, I bet that was just like a mimic or something. As I had a good idea what I was listening to, but I had never heard anything like it until I heard the Sierra sounds. And it may not be exactly what I heard, but it's pretty darn close. And no, the guttural, I guess I don't know how to explain it in that film or recordings, but nothing like some of it. Like when Ron Moorhead was mimicking them, and they were talking back to him slowly. It wasn't like that. It was fast, and I could not understand it. And I've heard many different dialects, and it was nothing like anything. In this area, the common immigrant right now is Ukrainians, and it was then also. And I've actually learned a little bit of Ukrainian and Russian, because when I deliver to them, when they say thank you, I like to say you're welcome in their native language, because they like that. They remember that. And so I've learned a little bit here and there, and it's nothing like that. And I've never heard anything like it since. I put out some recorders or whatever with my friend, and it's like the Holy Grail trying to get the communication. We haven't got anything like that, or I guess we'd be more well known.
So with all of your experience with these Bigfoot, what have you concluded that they are?
I believe there are people. They're some kind of a, just like us, some kind of a human, maybe not human, maybe from a different lineage, but I believe they're at least part human.
There's been some speculation if they are discovered and if it is found that they have human like, or if they're declared like some kind of an indigenous people, that that will kind of change some things. They might have rights, or there could be some industries impacted. What is your take on that?
I understand both sides of this, actually. One thing I would, when you brought up rights, now I believe they'd have to have some kind of rights, you know, but also wouldn't they have to have, if they are declared to be at least part human, wouldn't they have to have some kind of like a spokesperson? Wouldn't they almost have to come forward in some ways? I guess that thought just came to me now, so it's pretty um incomplete. I guess the word is. But as far as like forestry, I can see how areas would need to be more areas set aside for them, but also with the wildfires that we have, the need to eliminate fuel is pretty high. So there's no way in my mind that we could completely go now without some kind of forestry. Then that even takes out like lumber, that industry out of that equation with just the wildfires. We have to be able to do some just to keep the fuel levels in check, which are pretty. It's high. If you've ever been in the mountains, in the rock, in this area, Pacific Northwest and Montana, there is a lot of fuel laying on the ground.
Yeah, I would presume so. In these areas that you've been in where you know that there is some form of Bigfoot there, have you seen any of the structures or any of the telltale signs like that?
I have. I've seen a couple of X structures, but now I have a little bit of a problem with the X structures as two trees can fall in an X. And I've seen where people, have found where, the root ball is in the air on one of them, which also could be gravity. But I have not found one like that I could actually go up and inspect myself. I did see one little teepee structure once, and it was probably only, I'm gonna say it's probably 3 feet tall. It wasn't very big, but it was right alongside a road, and it was pretty early though. Were not many people. Actually, we might have been the first people through that spring because of the snowfall. It was very intricate, whatever, this thing, but my mind went right to people, so I did not get out to look at it. But other than that, I can't remember, like elk hunting and stuff. That's where we come across them, and these areas that we go come across a couple of X's, but that's all I've seen. That I guess if I would have seen more, I would remember it, but I must not.
How about any of the, kind of unusual paranormal things that some people describe seeing orbs, seeing lights. I've even heard of like a sparkly orange light color that people see around them. Have you seen anything like that?
No, ma'am, I have not. I'm be honest with you. At night, I'm asleep, and if I'm when we're camping or even out with my friend researching, I get up at 4 a.m. I work, 12 to 14-hour days. I go to bed. I don't, I can't stay up that late. And normally, prime researching weather, get up early. It's pretty light, fairly light out at, even 4 a.m. here in, early summer. So I'm not out much at night or in the dark.
Sure. So these experiences that you have had, are you able to describe more detail about their appearance? Did you get a good facial look at any of them?
No, ma'am. No, like the one I did see for certain was walking away from me. So I never seen his face. I guess I shouldn't say he, or, all I seen was its back. And its back was massive and hair covered. I could see the hair streaming off of its arms, but I'd never seen a facial feature.
How about walking? Was there any mannerism of walking that you could describe?
Honestly, I was too shocked at that time to really focus in on its walking, other than it was on two legs swinging its arms.
Did you feel any kind of fear from this thing, or it was walking away?
No,
So
no, I was in my house. So, and like I said, I thought this was a Pacific Northwest thing, and I was shocked. So I have felt fear before, but not from that.
how about when you heard those voices? Was that kind of frightening, or was it just kind of confusing?
A bit of both. It was very confusing for me, especially when nothing was standing there when I should be looking at something. But I was very uneasy, and it was I was before I walked up on there, I was already thinking about turning around, but my curiosity had got the best of me. I had to know what I was hearing.
So that's when you went to look for some evidence of what this thing was that you were listening to.
Yeah, yeah. I had to see if there was something. I had to see what it was, but unfortunately, it did not work out.
I've done a few interviews where a very similar thing happened. There was a real distinct sound, sometimes massive brush moving, sounded like something was just, really, really super close. And it sounded like it was just knocking down everything in sight. Not so much the voices like you heard, but then going to investigate the area, there wasn't anything knocked down, no brush moving, absolutely no evidence. And that's really a kind of an unusual report.
Well, for me, I believe that they just sat still, and I turned around and left, so they weren't in any way, shape, or form, in danger from me, as I was, getting out of there. So there was no reason for them to even knock anything down. I
Right.
have, I have heard what people call tree knocks, and we had one elk hunting right outside our wall tent that would that sound went through you. You know, you could feel it. I don't even know how to describe it. You know, just that loud pop. And I've heard trees growing up in Minnesota, you hear trees pop when it's below zero. You hear apple trees freeze and pop. You hear that stuff. It's not that loud. What we heard outside the tent was insanely loud. I mean, that that changed me a little bit. I thought, holy crap. You know, I didn't really want to be that in that area by myself for a while. But I I eventually I overcame it. I don't like feeling that way, so I I went up. My buddy had to go. His wife was having some health issues. And he had to go home, and I went up the ridge where we had thought these things were living. And there's it's a little draw of creek running through it, and it's really dark and it's pretty creepy, and it's thick, thick, thick. And I went right up by there, and of course, your mind's playing tricks on you, so you think something's watching you no matter what. But I felt like something was. But what I could hear, that popping noise that they make in the brush, but soft, just like they were signaling each other that I was there and close. And I said, all they have to do is stand still. And I sat up there for 3 hours and watching a clearing, hoping, hoping an elk would come through, but kind of hoping that an elk didn't come through so I could get out of there. Once it was getting dark, I was gone. I went back to camp, and actually my friend was there waiting for me. I told him what happened, but through all of it, the one right outside of our tent, the next morning we got up. It was opening of elk hunting, and we went out elk hunting. We never even looked for a track. And I remember walking with them, and I looked at them and said, some Bigfoot researchers we are. We have one outside of our tent, and we don't even look for tracks. And turned around and went back to elk hunting.
What do you think caused that? I mean, that was a phenomenal experience. Why do you think that you just kind of blew that off the next day whenever you got up and just?
For me, I'd never been elk hunting. I was pretty excited to go. So that was my top thing. That for me was your first opening elk hunt. It was way more important to me than looking for any kind of evidence. And we were out of there. It was still dark when we got out of the tent. So, I mean, when we went back, we did look a little bit, but we never found anything.
Sure. Did all of these experiences ever make you want to start just going out and really doing some serious research on it?
I have. Me and him, he's a retired Army medic, and he's out all the time. We have an area where I put in audio recorders, and he has some cameras set up. His cameras get messed with quite often there. Like he'll put a camera up, and when he goes back to get it, it will be at a 90. If they're supposed to be like this, his camera will be like this, and with the straps you know, straining, just about to break. And that stuff like that's common with his cameras. But my audio recording, I I built them myself, and I can get them. The 10-hour, I record 10-hour days or nights, excuse me, and I can get a I can get a month out of them. I can get 30 days out of them pretty easy. I've never pushed it beyond that. Um, but I've gotten a real nice clear knock with a return knock, and I use Kimbrough mics, and so you with headphones you can tell they're coming from different directions. If, you know, and a few other things that Doug Hychek has listened to, that he thinks that there was a young Sasquatch not far from my recorders messing around with something. Um, this last year actually was pretty bad. I haven't even been able to get out once this in the last year. It's just, family matters and whatever. So this last year was kind of a throwaway year, so to speak. Next year is going to be very different. Next year, there's going to be a lot more research.
Well, tell me, Mark, is there anything else that you'd like to share about your knowledge of Bigfoot or your experiences?
Oh, I'm sure I forgot the other part, the next year in elk camp. I did forget about that.
Okay, tell us about that.
We had another guy hunting with us named Herman, and it was just me and him in camp one night, and we got up next morning, and he was going to go up on that same ridge where I sat the year before. He was going to go up there, and I was going to go up a different spot and push, walk towards him to try to push any elk that may be there towards him. And he went out of the tent to go up. He had quite a walk, and I was going to take my Jeep, much easier. And he went out of the tent, and he was gone 20, 30 minutes. And he come walking back in. And I said, Herman, did you forget something? And he says, no, I'm gonna sit here for a little bit though. He said, I'm not going up there right now. Why not? There's a gate that we have to walk around to get up onto this ridge that, the closed forest road off. And as he was going around that gate, he heard a grunt. And a tree come down. He heard the tree being pushed down, as something pushed the tree down at him. And that was enough for Herman. He said, nope, not till daylight. And we looked, there's so many down trees in that area. Trying to find that one, we were unable to. We did find a track that year. Didn't have any plaster of Paris or hydrocal with us as we were elk hunting. We weren't thinking about needing anything like that. That's changed. There's a good bit of knowledge. Always bring your casting stuff with you, because you never know when you're going to need it. Just like your audio, I record a lot. Turn it on before you get out of your vehicle.
Exactly. So how many recordings do you think you have that are of the Bigfoot nature?
I think I only have that one night, that what Doug thinks is a young one. And that was 45 minutes long of recording, but broken up. Um, and I only have a few more, like 3, 4 more besides that night. Um, that that are any, like you could, I don't want to say question, because that's not the right word. You can't attribute it to another animal. I've gone through the Macaulay Sound Library? Can't remember the exact name of it. But bird calls and whatever, and I went through every night bird in Washington, Idaho, and Montana, which pretty much are the same birds, and everywhere here that could make these sounds. So when I hear different recordings, I know it's not one of those.
Well, that is interesting. I've heard that before as well, that when you can't define it, you can't define it. So you have to put it in some new category. And even though you may not have definitive proof that that's a Bigfoot, it certainly doesn't mean that it wasn't a Bigfoot.
Right. That's one problem with recordings. You do not know. I mean, you didn't see it make the noise. You just have a good idea. But because of those recordings, we know we're in a pretty good spot. We go out. It's very rugged and it's very hard to get through this area. And trails are pretty minimal. But one thing we actually look for trash, because you can age how long it's been since people have been there by their trash. And in this area that we've been at, the trash is old, like the steel antifreeze cans. So it's from like 50s, 60s. And that's no cigarette butts. There's a big one. Even, not a beer can. Old beer bottles we have found, of course. But if you do find a can, I guess it's not here. If it's a nice, still legible can, I like to pick them up and take them home because they're kind of neat. But that's a good tip there too, I guess. That's how you can judge how recent human activity and how much human activity is in an area.